And the American people, mark my words, the American people will not stand for an unelected, secret group to run rampant through the executive branch. Being innovative is good. But, Mr. Musk, this isn't a tech startup. These are public institutions that deal with things like Social Security and Medicare and national defense and provide for the well-being of the American people. And the American people have a right to be part of that debate. Part of that debate. The elections occurred, and one viewpoint got a few more votes than the other, but that doesn't mean we throw out democracy. That doesn't mean what's been done for centuries in this country should just go out the window and be substituted by a small group of people who think they know a lot more than the wisdom of the American people.
The best argument against the deep state that I've ever heard, isn't it? I think about it, that's got to be one of the single most incoherent rants. I mean, I've come across in a while. Chuck Schumer put down his Corona and his guac in an attempt to own Elon, which of course just gave Elon the chance to own him. Elon tweeted out that Upchuck is just mad because Doge is busy dismantling the radical left shadow government, you know, the unelected shadow government that's now in full view of the public. Everyone now is able to see how our federal departments have become nothing more than fronts for Democrat money laundering. Everyone is seeing it now. But maybe, just maybe, perhaps Upchuck is upset because he's suddenly realizing the state of his party. Perhaps he's turned into CNN and saw something like this.
Tired of the white tears. Listen, if you are competent, you are not concerned. When I walk into Congress every single day, you know why I don't feel a way and why you can't make me doubt who I am is because I know that I had to work 10 times as hard as they did just to get into the seat. When you look and you compare me to Marjorie Taylor Greene or me to Lauren Boebert, there is no comparison. And that is the life that we have always lived. So the only people that are crying are the mediocre white boys that have been beaten out by people that historically have had to work so much harder. This is why they don't want us to have education. This is why they are trying to literally say we won't fund the HBCUs, because they know that if they've already gone after affirmative action and they're saying, you know what, don't allow them to come into, say, these PWIs, as we call them, don't allow them to come into these institutions. We know why they created the HBCUs in the first place. It was because they wouldn't allow us into the white institutions. And so now they're not allowing us in. And now they're saying, you know what, we're also going to defund the HBCUs. You know why? Because they don't want any more Kamala Harrises. They don't want any more Jasmine Crockett's. But I got news for them. I don't care what they do. We will fight to the end to make sure that we get our due. Because again, if you want to talk about the people that shouldn't be in this country, you probably need to look in the mirror, because the last time I checked, the Native Americans who some of ICE have been rounding up, or the Puerto Ricans who are absolutely Americans, listen, the only people that came and colonized this place are your ancestors.
You know, how do I put this kindly? I've taken courses. I've studied. I've read numerous books on what's called hermeneutics. It's the art and science of interpreting argument, texts, and the like. I've taught hermeneutics. I've taught argumentation, debate. I've taught rhetoric. I can honestly say I have no idea what on earth that woman just said. I mean, that was a verbal train wreck. I mean, I guess I could list out the sentences that she just used, but how those sentences fit together in any kind of coherent thought, I couldn't even begin to explain it to you. I frankly, I don't think I've ever heard somebody speak so long without taking so much as a breath and yet say substantively so little. And of course, this is all now coming on the heels of the latest DNC leadership conference that gave us this.
Specify that when we have a gender non-binary candidate or officer, the non-binary individual is counted as neither male nor female, and the remaining 6 offices must be gender balanced. With the results of the previous 4 elections, our elected officers are currently 2 male and 2 female. In order to be gender balanced, we must elect 1 male, 1 female, and 1 person of any gender. So again, this is what we have to do for this vice chair race. We have to elect 1 male, 1 female, and 1 person of any gender.
I mean, I'm writing notes here, just trying to follow. Notice he had to repeat it a few times because of how incoherent this is. Think about, these are the people that Chuck Schumer is comfortable with in leadership positions over public institutions. These people shouldn't be anywhere near public institutions. I mean, you thought that previous woman on CNN was incoherent. Look, I'm just going to be blunt. Can I be blunt with you? The Democrats don't know what time it is. The Democrats don't know what era we're living in right now. I mean, at a practical level, I mean, we could get, very like not introspective. We can get very philosophical here. We're moving from an age of ideology to an age of identity. We're moving to an age of globalism, liberal globalism, to an age of nationalism, populism, traditionalism, where rhetoric like that they're spewing out, particularly woke rhetoric, is no longer intelligible. We can get into all of that. But I actually think it's just more practical than that. I don't think Democrats are used to being shut out of power. I don't. I think you have an entire generation of Democrats that have never experienced the wilderness wanderings that they are now currently subject to. So they're having all these mirages that they're still in power when they're not. I mean, even if you, again, just draw this out, even in the Reagan years, Democrats still owned Congress. In the Gingrich years, they still own the White House. And in the Bush years, they own the neocons. They're not used to being completely shut out of power. And I got to be honest, I think all of this is deeper than denialism, than simply living in denial. I think the Democrats are actually experiencing something more akin to a medical condition known as agnosia. Do you guys know that? Agnosia, Agnosia, agnosia. It's a neurological disorder that prevents a person from recognizing external phenomena. I'm not kidding. I mean, like, sight, sounds, people, objects. When I read unhinged leftists, and again, I read a lot. I read salon.com almost every day. I try to empathize with how they view the world so I can better understand it. And the more unhinged leftists I read, especially since January 20th, the more I'm convinced that they're not in denial. I mean, they are. Maybe that's where this all started. I mean, they're clearly denying reality, right? But it's deeper than that. A person in denial rejects reality or avoids accepting reality because it's simply too painful to accept. It's unpleasant. It's distressing. I think that's perhaps where all of this starts. I think that the unhinged left started in denialism. But the more I read, the more I listen to them, the more I listen into that DNC leadership conference, the more I listen to that lady ranting on CNN, the more I'm convinced that they are actually more akin to suffering from a collective form of agnosia, the total impairment of their recognition faculties. I mean, even more specifically, there's a condition called anosognosia, where a person can't even recognize their own health problems. Again, the key here is that there is sort of an innate inability here. So denial avoids accepting reality because it's too painful, whereas someone with agnosia or anosognosia can't recognize the problem at all. They have impaired abilities to recognize external phenomena. They can't recognize that they have a problem. And because they can't recognize they have a problem, then people in this condition often don't see the need to care for that problem. And so in this case, you end up with Democrats basically doubling down on all kinds of absurdities. I just read a very good example of this in the Daily Kos. You guys familiar with the Daily Kos? The Daily Kos is it's as far left of a website as you can get. Again, I read this stuff so you don't have to. I actually read more left-wing sites than right-wing sites because they often inadvertently reveal what's really going on in the nation in terms of the collapse of globalism and wokeness and the like. And so the Daily Kos just published an article entitled After Death. It's written by a pseudonymous author who goes by the moniker Liberal Thinking. So I do not know who, in fact, wrote it. I guess I could do some research to find out who Liberal Thinking is, but it doesn't really matter. It's an article that bills itself as a post-mortem on the election on November 10th. And of course, a post-mortem after a stinging defeat, a stinging electoral defeat, generally involves reflections on what led up to that disaster and thoughts on how it could be avoided in the future and what takeaways one could apply for the next election. I mean, the Republicans, for example, famously did this post-mortem after the 2012 Romney loss and concluded they actually concluded that they needed to be more like the Democrats and start running their own identity politics candidates. So that's why at the time Marco Rubio was being pushed so hard, if you remember that, leading up to 2016. And it's also why the Republican establishment it's one of the reasons why they so absolutely freaked out when Trump came on the scene, because they thought his brash populism was like the total opposite of what they were supposed to be doing, being more like Democrats and embracing the identity politics. Well, regardless, I was interested in this Daily Kos piece to see what lessons were being learned by the far left and at least by some Democrats from this disaster in November. And I wasn't 3 paragraphs into the article before I learned that this post-mortem wasn't about the Democrats. It was about the Republicans. So this author thought there was literally nothing for the Democrats to have learned from November. I kid you not, nothing. What we learned, according to this author, was that the Republican Party is what is technically post-mortem. It's the Republican Party that died in November, not the Democrats. It's clever. I'll give him that. You could read the article yourself. But I think you're going to be stunned by the utter self-defeating recalcitrance and total lack of self-awareness that this author exemplifies throughout the entire article. It's frankly shocking. And what? I mean, at one point, it's even a bit frightening in realizing just how deluded and deranged certain people like this can be. So this author, Liberal Thinking, has convinced himself that the election in November was won by a cabal of ultra-wealthy that basically duped the American people. It's an ultra-wealthy cabal that duped the American people. He's convinced himself that the Republican Party, being the party of big business, basically sold its soul. It sold out its morals. And we know that because of who they nominated as their presidential candidate, a twice impeached 34-count convicted felon. So the impeachments and the felony charges and convictions for this guy are impeccable. They're beyond reproach. He seems to be totally unaware. Again, at least appears to be. He's unaware of the notion of weaponized lawfare that was so central to the support of Trump. That just, for whatever reason, that's just not on his hermeneutic horizon. No, if you're supporting Trump, there's something morally debilitating about you. So the Republican Party is the party of big business, even though most billionaires, ironically, supported Kamala almost 2-1, according to the Wall Street Journal, which caused them to lose this cabal caused them to lose their morals and embrace a convicted felon who wants to impose authoritarian rule on the nation. That's right. Trump is the first fascist authoritarian to actually be shrinking government. It's very, very fascinating. No, he does not get into that. I think I saw that on a Babylon Bee or something like that. So as a result, now all the Republicans want to do is basically see you die. I'm sorry. I'm trying to present the argument. I'm trying to be responsible. Okay. I'm serious. This article, yes, was clearly hyperbolic, but my gosh, I mean, this is where the guy went. The Republicans sold their soul to this felon, and now they're in power, and all they want to do is they want to see you die. They want to get rid of all the regulations that keep you safe. They've gutted all the Green New Deal, factors that preserve the planet and the biosphere and the like, so that these immoral Republicans are going to cause more and more people to die. That's going to be the result. And one of the most ironic statements in the article, this guy goes so far as to say that the Republicans are so far gone, they're so morally bankrupt that they don't even know how far gone or bankrupt they are. So in other words, they've lost all self-reflection. So remember that condition I was telling you at the beginning, agnosia, right? Or nasthenosia, or the inability to recognize one's own health problems or the external world around you. Well, anyway, he goes on to say, don't worry, many people, he used this term, many people are bailing out of the Republican Party as we speak. They've had it. They're gone. Many people are taking off. And his example of many people, the Lincoln Project. Straw grasping, I know. The Lincoln Project, this tiny group of people, insignificant people that, by the way, are part of this money laundering scheme we're learning about through our federal departments, right? Like USAID. Those days are over. Thank you, Elon. But then he just went on to blame, and I kid you not, he went on to blame technology and social media for the Democrats' loss because it's all controlled by a pro-Republican oligarchy. Tell that to a guy who's been demonetized for the last year and a half, right? Now, why am I highlighting this for you? Because this article wasn't from a high school newspaper. It most certainly could have been. Well, actually, I think that's a little bit of an insult to high school newspapers. But this wasn't something penned by some triggered freshman in study hall. Gang, this was a piece published on a major left-wing site, the Daily Kos. This is what passes as political analysis of our time on the left today. Like I tell you, I read left-wing sites every day. I have no problem with well-reasoned, well-argued left-wing perspective. It's there. And it can be very persuasive at times, very strong. This ain't it. Absurdity doesn't even begin to describe it. This isn't doubling down. This isn't tripling down. There's nothing to double down on here. These are the rantings of a lunatic. And they appear to be sentiments shared by many, many fellow liberals. Otherwise, I don't see how it makes it through. If they do have an editorial process, I don't know. So we'll, of course, see how things play out in the near future here. But if the new DNC leadership and Chuck Schumer and CNN and this article are any indicators, The Democrats really are imploding. They're unraveling right before our very eyes, and it appears that it's their own war against reality that will be their ultimate undoing. We often talk about how we can maintain and build up the conservative way of life, and one crucial aspect of that is your routine. Staying strong physically and mentally isn't just about living longer, it's about living better. I partnered with Beam because they're a health and wellness company that's put in the time and rigorous research to craft science-backed solutions that truly optimize every system in your body from the moment you wake up until you lay your head down to sleep. More specifically, I've been using Beam Dream for a while now, and it's completely changed the way I sleep. I'm a horrible sleeper. I used to toss and turn while my mind raced through the night. But since taking Dream, gang, I fall asleep much faster and even sleep all throughout the night. It's a game changer. Beam Dream is made with the highest quality sleep-promoting ingredients to help you unwind and get the deep sleep you need and deserve. It's become a nightly ritual of mine. I look forward to it each and every day. Plus, I never wake up feeling groggy the next morning. I even wake up before my alarm sometimes, which is something I never used to do. I have the best deal I've ever had with Beam, so now's your time to give Dream a try. Shop early access to Beam's biggest sale ever, and get this, get up to 50% off site-wide for a limited time when you use promo code Turley. Yes, that's half off, gang. Don't miss out on this offer. Click the QR code on the screen or use the link below to propel your wellness journey to the next stage.
What ended most civilizations was a low birth rate. That is, an extended period of prosperity seems to cause birth rates to plummet. And it's somewhat counterintuitive. When a society is under stress, birth rates increase.
So let me say very simply, I want more babies in the United States of America.
That's so awesome. Musk and J.D. Vance, what a combination. All right, gang, obviously the birth rate of America has been declining now for decades. It's an issue that many people have been calling attention to, most prominently Elon Musk, but few solutions have been proposed or implemented at any governmental level. However, this crisis is unique because it seems that many people, particularly of childbearing age, believe that overpopulation is the crisis that we're facing today. And as many have pointed out, it's going to be difficult to begin to correct this trajectory if people don't realize that the true crisis we face is actually the opposite. It's the lack of children being born. Furthermore, a recent study has shown that women who are married and have children, they actually report greater levels of happiness and satisfaction than single women. And yet, ironically, single women reportedly believe that they're happier than women with children. So there's clearly a massive disconnect between reality and the often misguided public perception of family and children in America. So what should we do about this? Well, joining me today is Malcolm Collins. Malcolm is amazing. He's a leader of a rising pronatalist movement, which is leading the charge and drawing attention to falling birth rates and doing something about it. He also built a free educational model. He wrote several best-selling books, and he has a background in neuroscience with a focus on brain-computer interface. Yeah, he's smart. I know he's smart. Thanks a lot. This is the way he introduces himself whenever he walks into a room, and we all have to go,
I love this quote you have here. One of my favorite statistics that recently, so there was this statistic, it was published in a lot of books, and it was how happy are married women? And it said, well, married women, when their husband isn't around, and they had framed this like their husband is like isn't in the room, they actually say that they're less happy than unmarried women. And this had gone out there to try to convince people that like married women weren't happy. It turns out what the statistic was actually looking at is women whose husband had died.
Okay.
That's what it meant by not around. They were less happy than unmarried women. And yet they're like so progressive. They read this and they're like, not in the room, not in the room. And we were talking backstage. He's talking about how incompetent the other side is. Imagine if we were in a timeline where we were fighting against a competent enemy.
Yeah.
I am horrified by somehow, like, we got rolled into this and they control all the media, they control all the centers of power, and we're just now like winning. Like,
Yes.
it's awesome.
Yeah, it is. It is awesome.
I would not want to live in it. Like, getting to live in this timeline where we start on the back foot, we start as the disempowered, group, and now we're coming in and capturing the public narrative. People like you, with your channel, the number of people you reach, you're reaching what probably more than like your average CNN post reaches now. Like, that's wild.
Yeah, it is amazing. It's the cool. It's what a time to be alive, and it's just so and to be in this moment, to be in this epical shift from this old liberal globalist world to this more rising civilizationalist world. Yeah, we're inheriting a big mess, no question. You're on the front lines of it. But with guys like you, with Elon, with JD, with President Trump, I mean, just the sky's the limit. Now, all the great international leaders that we're seeing rise to the occasion. Malcolm, can you set the stage for us a little bit? For a lot of people, this pronatalism may be a completely new thing. They've just never come across it. Obviously not. Right? Yeah. CNN isn't going to be doing it.
No one has any idea. You look at a country like South Korea, their current fertility rates. This is when I started caring about this because of VC in South Korea. They're going to have 4 great-grandchildren. This is assuming for every 100 South Koreans, assuming it doesn't continue to fall, which it has for most of the past 20 years. If you look at the United States and you project our fertility decline going forwards, and you assume 1 generation every 30 years, that means for every 100 Americans. So keep in mind, unlike South Korea, I'm projecting this going forwards. You're dealing with I think it was 4.1 great-grandchildren. So all across the world. And when people talk about these numbers, when leftists talk about these numbers, they hide the economic severity of what we're talking about because they pretend like the economic productivity of any human in this country is the same as the economic productivity of any other human in this country. And yet, we know this isn't the case. We know somebody on welfare is more than 3 times more likely to have kids on welfare. I'm not saying this is a fair thing or a great thing that we haven't figured out how to make sure the kid of anyone is equally productive as the kid of anyone else, but we haven't. And when you just, think you can import people or think you can, we'll just give out tons of money to, societal parasites here and get them to have tons of kids, this is going to fix the problem. No, it makes the problem exponentially worse. But fortunately, we also win at the end of the day. We're already winning. So if you just look at the things they don't want to talk about, because the left hates talking about genes exist, for example. And there's a field of genetics called genopolitics. And the way that a person votes is around 40% correlated. If you look at identical twins raised in separate families versus fraternal twins raised in separate families, correlated with the way their parents voted. And if you look at the number of progressives, so if you go back to the 1970s, the difference in conservative and progressive fertility rates was 0.1%. Now it's something like 200 or 300%. They are driving themselves and their entire ideology into extinction.
Yeah.
And the only reason that they continue to matter, people are how do they still have voting power? Well, they figured out a little secret, which is if you take women and you prevent them from getting married, same with men, people who don't have families, who don't have a stake in the future, they vote dramatically more Democratic than they do when they are married. And we saw this in the Trump voting patterns. You look at married women, they voted for Trump. The demographic that was overwhelmingly anti-Trump in this last cycle was the unmarried women.
Wow. Oh yeah, the cat ladies, as JD fans go.
I call them nuns of the state because they have restructured the family system.
Around the state
used to rely on a man or on a family or something like that. They had a community, right? Whether it was their church or their local parish. Not anymore. Now they can get they can have as many kids. They don't have kids, but they could theoretically,
right?
But they can live off of the state. I was looking recently, something if you're looking at welfare recipients, there was something over 90% are women.
Wow.
Because they have developed a system where if you can disintermediate people's support networks, if you can convince them to hate their ancestors and their family, this is the way cults work. The way a cult works, the first thing they'll try to do is try to break your support network. They'll try to say, you hate your parents, you hate your ancestors, because that's how they get you to break from the people who would otherwise be there for you, right?
Right.
And
Right.
we see this at a societal level right now.
Right. Right. You know, it's so fascinating because when we all witnessed that horror of it back in was it August 15, 2021, the disastrous withdrawal from Kabul. And I remember reading some articles, ironically, by Francis Fukuyama, who had, what was it, 30 years prior in the early 1990s, declared the end of history and the whole world was going to go liberal Democrat after the fall of the Soviet Union. Now he was basically saying, actually, that world's falling and we're going into a much different world, a more nationalist, populist world. But one of the things that was so fascinating that I read about in terms of just the symbolism of that moment is how demographics played a role in Afghanistan. A lot of people recognize the Afghan population is significantly younger than the American population, Western populations in general. So the median age among Afghans was 18. In stark contrast to the United States, it was 38. In Britain, it was 40. And there were two significant factors to that. First, given that the Taliban were deposed about 20 years ago at that time, half the Afghan men and women who were living didn't even live under the Taliban regime the last time. So they didn't even remember it, don't know about it. But secondly, because they're having so many kids and that median age is 18, they're far more prone to fight than 40-year-olds. 40-year-olds just want to go home and watch the Super Bowl. They don't want to fight. So the relative youthfulness of the Taliban meant that they were able to effectively wait out the American and NATO occupation, all the while the relatively older American populace just grew increasingly tired and impatient with prolonged military campaigns and overseas. Demographics matter. And we really saw, in many respects, sort of the implosion of this old liberal model that said, who needs kids? We don't need them. Whereas the Afghans, in particular, the Taliban, had that much more traditional model that saw children as sacred and so forth. The two clashed, and guess what? Guess which one won?
Well, it's funny you mentioned this. One of the things I actually think the reason why Afghanistan has this high fertility rate is mostly due to they believe there's an outsider and they're in poverty. So Islam, for example, actually does not do great at preserving fertility rates unless
that's true. Yeah, that they have a problem with it. In general,
look at like Iran, they have a fertility rate of like 1.6.
Yeah,
and they've been dealing with a terrible they implemented a bunch of government systems to try to get their fertility rate up all the way back in 2014. They were one of the first governments to recognize this. And so a lot of people, they look to me and they go, are you worried? Because this is one of the truisms of fertility rates is two things can raise your fertility rate really easily. And a bunch of cultures have evolved this, most of them Muslim, let's be honest. But when I'm talking to progressives, I pretend like, some Christian groups do this and some Jewish groups do this, is if you disengage from technology and you become incredibly economically unproductive, your fertility rate shoots up.
Okay, interesting.
And so you see this, and this goes against, I don't have enough money to have kids. And why is it the less money you have, the more kids you have? This is between and within countries. And a lot of people are like, are you worried about these people like replacing you or replacing us or anything like that? And it's like, we're dealing with a changing economic and geopolitical order. When the Roman system fell, there was something called the Pax de Romana. And the Pax de Romana was the peace of Rome. And it was all these people under the Roman Empire who really hated each other. And when it all fell, they started fighting again. And if we look at the global geopolitical order today, we are under what we call the urban monoculture. You could call like progressivism, or like it's this global culture that's in Berlin or in Manhattan, and it's what differentiates Manhattan. If you go 3 hours outside Manhattan from the culture out there, you go 3 hours outside, it's all over the world. They've created a new Pax de Romana. And there's all of these people that would otherwise be fighting each other. And so this strategy of disengaging from technology and economic productivity is very successful when you're under the Pax de Romana of the urban monoculture. But eventually, there is going to be, I guess I can only say like a global battle royale. You could almost say coming up one day, eventually, right? I think we all see it at this point. A lot of people have been brought into countries who would fight the people in those countries if they didn't have the possibility of being arrested and stuff like that. And a lot of these people are going to realize that they brought AK-47s to an automated AI drone fight. I think that people may, when they're looking at fertility rates, sometimes misunderstand the utility of finding ways, even though it's harder, through fertility collapse. That doesn't mean economic unproductivity and doesn't mean disengaging from technology, because technology is everything in who ends up being the successor civilization to humanity right now. And we're right now at this point where the successor civilization is forming.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, isn't it fascinating that the primary voice, just given his audience, that's alerted us to the problem of depopulation is probably the biggest technologist par excellence out there, right? Elon Musk.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's no surprise. People, they always ask me, as being sort of like the face of this movement, they go, why are you always talking about this? And I'm like, well, because I used to be a venture capitalist. And they go, what does that have to do with anything? And I go, venture capitalist is the only profession in this country that has to determine what's going to happen in 100 years and gets punished if they're wrong about this. If I'm a demographer, there was a great thing that showed like the demographers from the UN, and they get it wrong every year. And it's
hard, man. Yeah.
Yeah. It's worse than and this is in Latin America. This is I don't know if you're using those, but Latin America is in a much worse fertility situation than the United States right now.
Wow.
Across Latin America, if you look at local demographers, you have countries getting close to this 1.3 number that we thought was only possible in the developed world. I think I'm going off the top of my head here, so I'm not great memory, but I think it was we have got Cuba, Costa Rica, Chile, Uruguay.
Brazil was low too, right? Brazil.
Maybe Brazil got low too. Like it's a number, it's like 6 of them or something. But like it's terrifying because in a way, and you move somebody from Latin America to the US, they do not produce the same for the economy as someone from America. That's just like, you're just taking the average Latin American. I'm not saying that any Latin American, I'm just saying average Latin American.
Right.
You can't get your way out of this with just importing people, but also it's super unethical to import people, because we're letting countries like Brazil pay the money to educate these people, and then we take them during their productive years, and then we ship them back. Like, of course, this is going to cause like economic catastrophe. And I love when I'm talking to leftists. They're like, okay, Latin America, by the way, collectively fell below repopulation rate all the way in 2019. So that means they're not replacing themselves. And so they're like, okay, well, we can solve this. They're like, well, who still produces people? And they're like, Africa still produces people. Now, I note Africa only produces people. If you look at like Wikipedia and you look at countries' fertility rate by average income, only when they're below an average of 5,000 USD per year. So desperate poverty. But okay, why don't we just import people from Africa? They're like, yeah, we didn't fund our social security system, so we'll import people from Africa to support a majority white population in the United States and Europe. And I'm like, the optics of that.
Yeah,
may not be as good as you think they are. And then one of my favorite things, I was talking to a reporter once, and I was like, you understand that, right? If we go with this Africa human farm solution, they only stay above repopulation rate if we keep them in desperate poverty. We keep them under 5,000 USD per year. And this reporter, I kid you not, this reporter, supposedly like leftists, everything like that, they go to me, they go, what are you, like some kind of conspiracy theorist? You think the CIA would sabotage developing countries just to help the U.S. economy? And here I am like, I thought like, yes, that's like their main job.
That's
like
the only reason why they exist. Yeah.
Anyway. No, so the situation is dire. We win at the end of the day, which is fun. I feel very much like a Noah's Ark sort of thing, and I'm going out and I get to tell people, because I lack the patience of Noah. I get to tell the fairies and the unicorns, and I get to say, hey, get on the ark. And they're like, well, you must really hate fairies. And I'm like, well, you're a fairy phobe. And I'm like, I guess I am. Okay, I'm not going to. I told you the situation. If people who support fairies are not breeding at above repopulation rate, people who support fairies won't exist in the future.
Right.
Of course, I'm talking about a mythical race here, not any sort of real population.
Right. I'm curious, what do you see as sort of the optimum? I know every culture is a bit different here or there. Religions are different and the like, but it seems to be that you want to have sort of your optimal balance between, I guess, what we could call in sociological terms, mythos and logos, as it were. So you've got your your traditions and your technology. So you've got your meta narratives that define our values, as Jordan Peterson always talks about all the time. But then you have the basic technologies of implementation by which society functions and operates. And it seems to me that we need both. So you can have all the technologies in the world, but if nobody wants to have kids, you're not getting anywhere with that. On the other hand, you can have all the desire in the world to have kids, but if the economics and the material conditions keep getting in your way, and aren't conducive to that, like I've read our society, for example, where we don't graduate college till we're basically 28 in this technocratic world, and the biological clock for women just starts running out. I mean, that can frustrate any desire. So it seems to me you have to have a balance between a very pronatal mythos, a pronatal meta narrative, pronatal values, and a pronatal logos, pronatal technologies, material conditions, and the like. What say you?
Well, I mean, the game is getting harder. It's harder than it's ever been historically. There was a paper that came out recently that said, and in the developed world, 60% of men are going to be infertile by 2060, 50%. So, yeah, I mean, technology is an important part of getting through this. In part, I mean, we created this situation with our technology, I guess you could argue here. But also, we need to be realistic about the role of religion in this. And it's one of the things I always, when I'm talking to progressives, I'm like, oh, I know that you're dealing with fertility collapse, but don't worry. There are minority populations in your country that are very high fertility. And they're like, oh, let's protect them. What do they look like? And I go, well, they're usually conservative and religious. And they're like, well, what do you mean protect them? I mean, protect their children from deconversion. Right now, a lot of them are being castrated. And I'm like, well, you might call it the trans. And they're like, oh, no, we can't handle. The state can't be castrating kids. Oh, no, of course the state must be castrating kids. Right. No, but if you look at the wider narratives around this and everything like that, you look historically, this is, I think, the number one graph. Whenever I show somebody about falling fertility rates, the graph that always gets me is if you go to the United States and you divide fertility rates by age range, every age range you see going up, except for one, below 24. Below 24 is shot downwards. And what people don't realize is it's not necessarily that we're not, continuing to go up within these other age ranges. It's just that there was this demographic that used to have kids due to lust, maybe poor decision making. Some of it was correct. I mean, I do think that, if you're 21, you should be having kids. But I think a lot of this, where it really goes down is when you get under 20, is when you see this big crash. Yeah. And what we need to move to is a society that in part motivated fertility through impulsiveness. I.e. kids making mistakes, you could say. Now, I don't think any kid is a mistake, but I think that these people didn't intend to create kids in a historic context when they were having these kids, to a society where we value children for their own sake. Some people will come to me and they'll say, okay, so we should ban condoms and we should ban pornography. And I'm saying, well, the problem is like South Korea, for example, already bans pornography and they have a horrible situation here. Right. I don't know if the solution to fertility collapse is to get people who have poor self-control, and because they didn't have access to pornography and condoms that day, they ended up having a kid. Right. I think we need to convince people that kids and human civilization and society is good in and of itself. And this is actually a challenge that we didn't have ancestrally, because we were able to sort of bank on the people who didn't have access to porn and condoms making up the deficit. And we can't bet on that anymore. And it turns out that just banning it doesn't work, because like VPNs exist, and like it turns out it's really hard to ban people access to this stuff. So how do we motivate people to believe that children have value, that humans have value? Especially when historically, the reason people had lots of kids is more hands on the farm, more hands in the factory. Now you need some exogenous motivation where it's not wealth to you, but like kids have value in and of themselves. And every system of exogenous ideological motivation to have lots of kids is, religious in nature.
Yeah, it tends to be religion.
Religious.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it
And
tends to be the primary, as I understand it, the primary indicator, particularly in Western secular countries,
yeah.
the religion. Yeah, yeah,
And how
yeah,
do we protect that? I mean,
yeah,
that's why
yeah.
we spent time creating a free alternate school system with the Collins Institute. Is we're like, okay, how do we create a
Sort of parallel education, right?
parallel education that's not going to try to brainwash your kids, because the
Right.
existing system, when we talk about this urban monoculture, remember I mentioned that like progressives used to have like about the same fertility rate as conservatives.
Yeah.
A question we all need to be asking is, if they have almost no kids, where are they getting their
Yeah.
people from?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's
they're
our
poaching them. Yeah, exactly.
It is
Yeah.
existential for them that they
Yeah.
keep this cycle going. People say, why do they target children? And it's because people leave their birth culture and religion most frequently between the ages of 15 and 23.
Wow.
So that's why it's the iterations of their culture that disproportionately targeted children, just ended up spreading at a higher rate than the iterations that didn't. It's
Right.
cultural evolution. You don't even need malevolence. It's just this growing
Right.
blob.
Malcolm, what do you think? Two questions here. What do you think of the efforts being done by, say, Viktor Orban in Hungary, or what we're seeing with Patriarch Ilya in Georgia, Putin in Russia? He has the yearly honoring of families, large families. I think 8 or more children. What do you think of those efforts? And what do you envision? What is something that you would love to see from our own country in terms of policy to help bring together sort of this mythos logos in a pronatal fashion?
Yeah. So Victor, if you look at the efforts in Hungary, they for everyone, oh, this is so great. Look at all these things he's doing, right? And if you go to our video of our podcast, the biggest lie that pronatalists will tell you is that these worked. They didn't work. The country actually, if you look at local demographers now, has the lowest fertility rate it's ever had in terms of like birth rate. It's doing terribly. Its fertility rate did rise, but it rose post-COVID. And if you compare it to neighboring countries, it rose less than neighboring countries. You look at Putin. Oh, this guy will be remembered for the genocide of the Slavic people. His country already had a desperately low fertility rate, like 1.2, 1.3. He wastes a generation on his closest ethnic and genetic relatives. I don't care that the situation was unfair. It was unfair to him. Okay. But like the thing that matters, one of the things that always got me is I was in South Korea and I was thinking, okay, who's gonna be living in these buildings when it's like 4% of the existing population? I was like, it could be the Chinese. No, they have a desperately low fertility rate. Could be the Japanese. No, they have a desperately low fertility rate. And it's crazy to think that these three cultural powers used to fight over everything. And I was like, that the Japanese were able to motivate their population to kill millions of people, less than like a century ago, but they can't motivate them to have kids. And I was talking to someone about this and they go, well, let me tell you something, Malcolm. It's a lot easier to kill someone than it is to raise a kid. And I think that Putin is playing under the old system. The only thing that matters now is, one, we're not countries anymore. We're cultural groups. We might be a country that's made up of an alliance of cultural groups, but we're cultural groups. And so if your cultural group can do two things. You need to both outbreed, but also have the kids who are born into that cultural group. As my wife says, the first 18 years of a kid's life are a sales pitch for your culture to them. And if you fail that sales pitch, it doesn't matter anything else, And if you use systems that were meant to keep people in, 50, 60 years ago when you were the majority, those systems are going to fail. So Putin, as much as I respect some of the things he's done, I do not think that the Slavic cultural group is going to survive this. Whereas there's other cultural groups that we're just like not paying attention to at all right now and may have set up shop in some European countries and are doing quite well, milking all the social services that other cultural groups are paying for, and they'll eventually replace them. It's a completely new system. You don't need to invade your neighbors. They'll invite you in and pay you to replace them now. That's the system that we're dealing with right now. And if you look at this world of we're going to go out there, we're going to conquer, we're going to, you're looking at everything wrong. You're looking at the old system, and the old system used to work when you could just count on your people having lots of kids because, okay, you go out, live in shroom, right? You go out, you conquer another people, you can enforce your culture on them, and you can maybe replace a portion of them with your own people, right? And then eventually replace them all. It doesn't work that way anymore if your people aren't having kids themselves.
Right.
So it's just a completely new sort of geopolitical game. But the cool thing is if you're an American and you're listening to this and you're an American conservative, you're probably already on the winning side, because we are, of all of the developed world countries, of all of the economically productive people, we are one of the only ones that is decent fertility rates, like American conservatives.
Yeah.
We're decent economic productivity. The only other group in the world that matches American conservatives is Israelis, which also have amazingly good fertility rates and economic productivity. And there's already dealing with the future that we're likely going to be dealing with, which is these groups. Remember, I mentioned there's some groups that adapt xenophobia, technophobia, economic unproductivity. They use this to get their fertility rate super high, and then they will attack the groups that are fortified by faith and the groups that have economic productivity. And they're already seeing them, but we'll be dealing with a situation like that soon enough ourselves.
Yeah. Wow. That is wild. What do you see? What do you see on the horizon? Say like the next 5-10 years. I love how you're breaking it down in you're staying away from aggregates and you're looking more at subcultural groups. I love that.
Yeah.
Eric Kaufman has done some work in that, particularly with the religious subgroups, Mormons, Amish, and so forth. Amish doubling every 20 years. And so what are some of the key milestones you hope to see in, say, like the next 5 to 10 years?
The Amish rely on the Pax de Romana to exist, right? Whenever somebody's like the Amish will have it, the Amish only have their land because the U.S. government defends them. Like, if somebody was just like, I'm going to take their land, like they just take their land. They are doing well because of the existing geopolitical order, and I think they're a good example of that. I like the Amish, by the way. I love them. I hope that somebody forms some sort of like symbiotic relationship with them to help them protect their land, but it won't always be the U.S. government as that begins to. Now, maybe Trump fixes it, because my gosh, I didn't expect him to do this much. The Mormons have fallen below replacement rate. There are factions of the Mormons that may rise above this, but Mormons have a sort of critical failure at the core of their existing identity, which is they want to be accepted as mainstream normal Christians, which unfortunately makes them really susceptible to whatever is quote unquote normal in society. And when society is controlled by the urban monoculture, this really toxic force, that damages them. One of the things that everyone always says is, why are the pronatalists so weird? And I'm like, well, because you're defining weird by cultural distance from the dominant cultural force in society. And the dominant cultural force in society is this urban monoculture. When I'm looking at like, what are the next things I'm really excited about? Look, the Pronatalist convention, anybody who wants to go, it's March 28th, 29th in Austin. I think you're going to be there.
Yeah, I'll be there. Yeah, absolutely.
I don't run this, by the way. A Mormon guy runs this. And I love that I don't run this, because I'm like one of these weird tech people, right? Like, he's one of the more traditional conservatives. And I think that what we are increasingly seeing within the new conservative movement, and you mentioned this at the beginning of the podcast, is that's like all the still sane people sort of allying together against this cult that's controlling our society. And I don't know what to call it other than, I mean, they say things that are insane. They're not coming from science. All this stuff around like women and men being the same thing, and like in women's sports. This is like a, and everyone, they're like, oh, you must feel so bad living in this timeline. And I'm like, no, this is a timeline we all dream of. Like, I'm on this little team of like different, it feels like almost like the Hobbit. You've got the elf, and you've got the dwarf, and you've got the guy. We all have very different views, but we know what evil looks like. Okay?
We know what evil. We know Mordor. We know more. We could smell Mordor when we're around it. Yeah.
The progressives are always like, oh, you have these weird beliefs. These people must hate you. And I'm like, dude, you have not been to a conservative rally. Like the MAGA movement is one of the most. The thing is like, you think like I'm more against, what am I against that the Trump government is doing right now? Oh, they're shrinking government. Oh, they're fighting DEI. Oh, they're fighting this gender nonsense. Like, all sane people agree on this.
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
They want to paint this battle that is from I don't know, in their minds. But it's awesome. It's awesome being in this timeline. And I'm so glad to be in it with you and hopefully a lot of your listeners. And when you're disheartened, remember that the opposition isn't no force in human history has ever gone to their enemy and be like, I hate you so much, I've decided to not have children. Let's see how you think about that in a few hundred years. This is not a winning. We can just
there is a self-immolation element to it, isn't there? Just kind of dousing themselves with oil and setting themselves on. Well, like Denethor in the Lord of the Rings at Gondor, just jumping off the building. Yeah.
It's not it. They're like running up to us and they're like, crack Suicide Squad, a symbol. And they're like, I thought we were going to have to fight over this. And even better than all of this, if you're like, are we the good guy? So the pronatalist movement has attracted on the left an even larger movement. Like if you look at subreddits and stuff like this, called the antinatalist movement or the ethylist movement. You can look these guys up. This is a real thing. They're huge. And they don't want any humans to exist. And the ethylist movement, even more than this, they're like, we can't let no humans exist, because we have to erase the potential for sentient life to ever evolve again. So we need to glass the planet. We need to kill all other life. And I'm like, this can't be the real timeline where I'm fighting against cartoon villains.
Exactly. It is. That's the thing I've often said. We could not script our enemies, as it were, better than these are right now. I think they've just lost critical thinking fact. And I'm being serious. I'm not trying to be dismissive. I do think they've lost critical thinking faculties. I think they've lost just the ability to understand, just to be able to rightly interpret external phenomena. They're just the hermeneutic horizon for them has been so ideologically warped that it's very, when all said and done, if you think it through, Malcolm, when they're tuning into MSNBC and so on, they want to be lied to in the end. I just don't know any other way of putting it. They want to be lied to because I think they just can't handle reality in the end. And when all said and done, what I've loved about the pronatal movement, what I've loved about our crowd, the MAGA crowd, the Maha crowd, and so forth. I remember for 4 years, our audience probably the biggest refrain I get in terms of, questions or what have you is, Dr. Steve, just don't lie to us. We just want to, if things are bad, let us know. If Trump is going down, let us know. Don't get our hopes up only to have it dashed into the end. Our crowd doesn't want to be lied to. We want science. We want religion. We want tradition. We want technology. We want Trump. We want Elon. We want it. We want human civilization. That's all we want in the end. We want that civilization to flourish. I think we're dealing with an enemy that, like we talked about, is anti-civilizational. And as part of that anti-civilizational, you can't think apart from...
Well, no, but this is the part of why they're a little scary. Historically, when the world was divided into teams, that song, at least the Russians love their children too. Right. We are finally dealing with an enemy civilizationally that doesn't love their children, that wants humanity to stop existing. That's and I think, one of the things we often talk about on our channel is the trial of the lotus eaters, this existing time of plenty. And we thought that when you gave people access to not having to worry about food, not having to worry about heat, not having to worry about all of these things, that they would devolve into hedonism. And a portion of them did. You can look at our episodes on like PrEP and stuff like that, the government paying for all this. But a larger portion, it turned out even more tempting than hedonism, was the human drive to remove responsibility from oneself. And the way that this is done is through self-victimization. And I think that this pathological self-victimization is where a lot of this brain rot comes from that we're talking about, is they want to say, none of this, I'm attacked, I'm going to be sent to a breeding camp, this is a coup, this is How dare democracy elect somebody? I'm an unappointed government bureaucrat. That is what democracy is.
That's so true. It's so true. Malcolm, where can people go to check you out? I know you got a great YouTube channel. Everyone should be
we got the Base Camp YouTube channel. Check out Simone and Malcolm. It's Simone and Malcolm Base Camp. We got the YouTube channel. podcast, everything like that. We do the whole thing. We are maybe very, very spicy. I would say I love your channel. I love your channel. You're so much more succinct than us. And you get across a lot of the same information. But if people want like philosophical like rants that are actually crazy, with a husband and wife trying to, because, you know, we're trying to find systems that work for our family. In a world where we see religion eroding, where we see the world eroding, and it's, you know, we take this, well, we can't just do things the way they've always been done, because clearly that's not working right now against the enemies that we're fighting against. But if you like wacky ideas, we're to go. But I love this channel. You are absolutely who's replacing CNN right now. MSNBC. You're probably bigger than MSNBC right now. I mean, I guess.
We leave them in the dust, man. They're nothing.
Can you believe that you were like demonetized not recently? That they had like beat you and now you're back?
Oh man. Yeah. Now we're about, that's right. It's so crazy. Just literally 2 weeks after Trump gets elected and we suddenly get remonetized. Well, what do you know? Bing, 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 you're back. And it's like, and then we see the CEO of Google at the inauguration. I'm like, I think I'm getting, it's a new dawn here.
I've got a breaking news, by the way. We haven't mentioned this on our channel. Okay, so the way that YouTube used to do this is they had an AI, this was recently for like the past 6 months, that would mark some of your videos as ad ineligible. And now, even when a video is marked as ad ineligible, the moment it goes live, it immediately switches to ad eligible if it was marked ad ineligible for a political reason. And nobody seems to have noticed or commented on this yet.
Wow. Oh, yeah. Something's happening here, man. It's
vibe shift
is flowing. Yeah, vibe shift, big time. This is huge, gang. I love Malcolm's channel. You got to check it out. All his resources. We'll have all the links down below for you to check out. Just amazing stuff. Pronatalism.org. Check that out. His education curriculum. Join the movement. Join us in
.org. You can check it out. Yeah. And at the end of the day, we will replace them. That's the goal right here. You know, right?
they entail their own demise. That's the I think Kaufman referred to it as the inherent, what did he call it? The inherent contradiction in liberalism, this absolute commitment to sovereign individuality in the end undermines their own replacement. It's insane. So Malcolm, thank you for all the work, and to your lovely wife, thank you for all the work that you guys do.
Child number 5 working on right now.
Child
excited.
Number 5. Oh man, you beat me. I got 4. You beat me, man. Between my business partner and I, so we're 50-50 here. He's got 6, I got 4, so we got 10 between the two of us. But you're doing it, man.
You gotta keep it up. 1 a year. That's what we're aiming for.
Oh man, Irish twins, isn't that?
Yeah.
Love it,
all
Malcolm.
right, have a good one.
Thank you for joining. Please come back soon.
Will do.
Hey gang, owing back taxes is a huge burden, and unfortunately the pandemic relief is over and the IRS is on its way to make you pay up. They've hired thousands of new agents and sent over 5 million pay-up letters in 2024 alone. But if you're dealing with this mess, I want to connect you with a real, tangible solution. Don't give up your rights or deal with them alone. The IRS is obviously not your friend. Let Tax Network USA, a trusted tax relief firm, save you the time and money you deserve to keep. They've saved Americans over $1 billion in back taxes and have the skills needed to secure you the best possible deal. From a few thousand to $10 million, business to personal taxes, let Tax Network USA restore your good standing so you can strengthen your financial foundation. When your situation is secure, you become the pillar of strength our nation needs. Call 1-800-245-6000 for a private free consultation or visit tnusa.com/.